Hello everyone, and welcome to Autocrat, episode 12 of Mythological Custody Battle.
Hello, and this is the story of Persephone. So you remember Zagreus from last episode?
I do!
Well, this is his mother. Let's get into the famous story that everyone has probably heard, which is her abduction. That's pretty much the one thing that anyone knows about her.
Ooh.
The word pomegranate seeds may be coming to your mind.
It does.
Now, Persephone is the daughter of Zeus and Demeter, who is one of the other children of Kronos and Rhea, and therefore his sister, as is Hera. There's a lot of this kind of thing going on. Now, Zagreus was born from Zeus and Persephone when she was already the bride of Hades, which we said last time. But how did she even end up here? Well, let's go back in time and sort out how exactly Persephone ended up in the underworld with Hades. Persephone is mentioned by Pindar, for starters, but there isn't a lot to go on. According to him, she might have been given Sicily to rule over, which seems a little random as a detail, but the text is a little unclear. However, the main meat of our story today is going to come from the Homeric hymns. The Homeric hymn to Demeter explicitly opens by saying that Zeus gave Demeter's daughter Persephone to Hades, so sort of as an agreement between the father and the groom, which doesn't seem too weird until you remember that these two are also brothers. Note that the text never mentions Hades by name, and a footnote explains that the ancient Greeks were actually afraid of saying his name, so there's various euphemisms to Hades in there, while his name is never actually mentioned explicitly. Apparently, according to the story, Persephone was playing with the Oceanids in the outdoors, with Demeter not being there, so she's just frolicking around in a field with some friends. Persephone reached out to grab a Narcissus, but it was a trap, and the earth opened up when she did, so presumably there's some sort of mechanism or charm in place that when she grabs this, the earth opens up.
Oh,
Hades then emerged on his chariot and took her away to the underworld. She called out for her father Zeus for help, but no one except Hecate and Helios heard. Do you remember who Helios is?
Yes, he's a titan.
Yes, he is, and he was the old version of the god of the sun, if memory serves.
That's what I was about to say.
Yeah. Demeter grieved when she found out her daughter was missing, and for 9 days she wandered the earth with torches in her hands and not eating or drinking. Then she came across Hecate, who told her that she'd heard the events that had unfolded, but hadn't actually seen it happening. The two of them found Helios, and Demeter asked him who had taken Persephone. And, in response, Helios said that only Zeus was at fault because he had given Hades Persephone in the first place. He tried to console her in saying that Hades wasn't a bad husband, being of the same blood as them, and having a third of the world, as the division of the world between Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus had said. He then rode on through the sky. Demeter wasn't convinced by this particular argument, and was so upset that she abandoned Olympus and went to the earth, which feels a lot like rage-quitting to me.
A little bit.
She wandered round until coming upon the house of a man called Celeus, or Celeus, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that. It's spelt C-E-L-E-U-S in the text. She sat down near a well which women used to get water from, and Celeus's 4 daughters found her there and didn't know that she was a goddess. They asked who she was, and Demeter basically comes up with a fake identity for herself at this point. She called herself Dozo, with the point made that her mother gave her the name specifically, which seems a bit odd but the text doesn't really come back to it, and that she'd been dragged from Crete by pirates who she escaped from. She asked these daughters where she could find a job, and I think she's in the guise of an old woman at this point. The daughters invited her into their parents' house, and their mother confirmed this when they went to check after filling their water vessels. Metaneira, the mother, asked Demeter to raise her son, and Demeter agreed. This child was called Demophoon, with 2 O's and an N, and Demeter raised him by anointing him with ambrosia, meaning he grew despite no suckling or feeding, and held him in the fire of a night which his parents didn't know about.
Okay.
The text doesn't really make it clear why, but he became like the gods and would have become immortal and eternally young hadn't Demeter been interrupted by Metaneira's cries one night when she saw her son being held in a fire.
Yeah.
From what I can make out, the fire appears to be part of the process of making him immortal and like the gods. It isn't just Demeter deciding to try and see how long you need to hold a child in a fire for before it catches light. Demeter became angry, grabbed the child out of the fire, and threw him on the floor. She then revealed herself in her goddess form and said that Demophoon would never have eternal youth now. Metaneira was stunned, and the daughters ended up needing to pick their brother up and stir into action, so he's just been left on the floor all this time while Metaneira is paralysed and inactive. Celeus was told what had happened in the morning, and he told the townsfolk to make a temple to Demeter, presumably as a way to try and calm her down a little bit.
Yeah.
When it was done, Demeter stayed there all year round, pining for Persephone. All that year, seeds didn't grow, and you can imagine this is a bit of a problem for people.
Yeah, it would be.
Humanity would have died in a famine had Zeus not intervened, and also there wouldn't have been offerings made to the Olympians if humans were all dead, which I'm presuming is the more relevant reason for Zeus. Iris was sent to summon Demeter, but Iris's pleas didn't stir her. One after another, the gods were sent to try and coax Demeter out with offerings, but she didn't move. In point of fact, she made a pledge that she wouldn't go back to Olympus until she saw Persephone herself. Hearing this, a presumably very exasperated Zeus sent Hermes to bring Persephone to her. Hermes went down to the underworld and found Hades on a couch and a pining Persephone next to him, notably hesitant to be there. Hermes told Hades he'd been sent to bring Persephone to her mother, and there's a slight funny detail in this text where apparently Hades has dark hair and Persephone's blonde. That just crops up randomly in the text at this point.
Why not?
Hades reluctantly agreed to Hermes saying Persephone needs to go back up to the surface and told her to go back, but said she shouldn't think badly of him, that he'd make a good husband, and that she'd been queen of all that he was king of. Persephone was happy to go, but apparently Hades gave her pomegranate seeds to eat. Now, I'm not sure if this means that he does this without telling her. The main point is the pomegranate seeds end up in her possession somehow. Hades led her to his chariot with immortal horses, and Hermes rode it away. There's actually a funny aside detail in this part of the text where it feels like the chariot's actually in the hall, so in his actual house when Hermes rides it away, which I like imagining. Just next to the TV and the couch, that's where we keep the chariot with 8 horses.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the only place for it. Stables are not possible. Anyway, Hermes brought her to the temple, and mother and daughter ran to one another. Demeter hugged her daughter, ecstatic to have her back, but had a sense of foreboding at this point. She asked Persephone if she'd eaten or drunk anything, because if she had, she was obligated to stay down in Hades' realm for a third of the year. I'm not sure why, that's just how it works apparently, don't worry about it.
It works.
Yeah. When spring came, she would be able to go to the surface again in that agreement, and if that had happened. Persephone responded that Hades had secretly put a pomegranate seed in her mouth, which is hilarious to imagine as a detail, because I don't know how you put a pomegranate seed in someone else's mouth without them noticing.
When you kiss them?
Maybe, but the text doesn't say they kissed, so I just imagine Hades just with a pomegranate seed, just sort of thrusting it in her mouth. Like, there's no way you wouldn't have noticed.
Asleep?
I don't know, there's no way you would have noticed. But if she was asleep, then she wouldn't know that she'd eaten a pomegranate seed, so this detail just seems excessively bizarre.
Oh well.
She unwillingly tasted it, is basically the takeaway from this story. She didn't want to, but she's taken food from the underworld. By the way, she recounts the story of her abduction to her mother, and I will only mention this because some names we've seen before are in the list of people she was with at the start. Namely, Styx, Pallas, and Artemis. Now, it might be a different Pallas from the giant we've seen before, because as far as I remember, that one is very dead. But I might be wrong. Hecate also hugged Persephone, and Zeus sent Rhea to bring Demeter up to Olympus, so trying to sort everything out at this point. The agreement was made that, for a third of the year, Persephone would stay below in the underworld. Well,
so, a year from January to December, how many months would that be?
4 months.
That's still more months out than months in, right?
That's true, but I imagine if you're the mother, 8 months with your daughter is less preferable than 12 months with your daughter. But then again, she has now consumed food from the underworld. According to some specific rules that I don't know who made up back in the day, she has to stay there now. Demeter promptly made fruits come back, because her daughter's come back to her, she's no longer as grieving. By the way, Persephone does turn up much later, after this story's already concluded, in the story of Theseus. This is because Theseus tries to help his friend Persephone kidnap her, although I suppose it would be kidnapping her again, if you add Hades to that list. We won't get into it here in a lot of detail, but just know that it doesn't end well.
When does it ever do?
No. Theseus escapes with the help of Heracles, but Persephone is trapped in the underworld forever, and he is a mortal trying to abduct a goddess who is also the wife of another very powerful god. The ground itself rumbles when Heracles tries to get him away. So he tries to let Persephone escape, but the ground rumbles as if to tell him, no, this one stays. Our final thought for today is that there have been some modern interpretations and retellings of Persephone's story. A detail from the first is that when Demeter tries to make Demophoon immortal, it's actually her trying to stop Hades having any control over him, so sort of as revenge, I think. When this doesn't work, she starts a famine that has a shot at getting rid of mortal people entirely, so in another very extreme way, robbing Hades of his jurisdiction. Zeus gave Hades Persephone, but Persephone herself didn't know. Finally, Persephone has also been identified as someone who suffers from Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome is defined as developing a positive feeling for the person who has kidnapped you, and supposedly she's mesmerized by Hades, who has, let's not forget, kidnapped her. Apparently, Hades made a duplicate of the world above for Persephone, and his plan was to adjust her to the darkness of the underworld below by phasing out the stars slowly. The kidnapping was because he didn't know how to convey his feelings for her, which very much feels like not the solution.
Not very much so, like you don't just kidnap someone and hope they'll start having feeling for you.
No, I mean, Hades, have you heard of letters? The paper where I got this from concludes that Persephone is overprotected by Demeter, and when Hades kidnaps her, she's immediately smitten by him and exhibits Stockholm Syndrome, so from one extreme to the other. This version says that Zeus had promised a daughter to Hades, but doesn't specify which one, so presumably Persephone was just put in a bowl with all the many other daughters of Zeus and picked out at random. However, I'd be inclined to believe the primary source of the Homeric hymns instead, which says specifically that Persephone was the target of the abduction.
Alright.
With these last few notes, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you all very much for listening, and I do have one small announcement, which is that on our website now we have a gallery of images of some Roman emperors and individuals associated with them, thanks to a visit I made in 2023 to the Musée Saint-Raymond in Toulouse. So those images are now at last on the website, feel free to have a look. Do you have anything else to add?
Not very much. Hope you all have a great week, and don't forget you can reach us whenever you want, and yeah, have fun everyone.
Yeah, have a great week. So that's the story of Persephone done. Was it what you were expecting?
Yeah. We weren't mentioning at the beginning of her son by Zeus, but later in the story twice you mentioned she is his daughter. So did he have a kid with his daughter then?
Yes, so Zagreus is simultaneously his son and his grandson.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I didn't expect the penny to only drop now in that particular regard, but yes, Zagreus is child by his own daughter.